at Large on Newstalk 106 to 108.
Well, one of the aspects of the inquiry that is going to have to be dealt with is the often confusing facts surrounding the case of the death of Savita Halappananvar. I'm joined now by Kitty Holland of the Irish Times, who broke the original story. Kitty, you're welcome to the programme.
Hello, yeah.
Kitty, on the 17th of November in The Observer, you wrote that there was no evidence as of yet that Savita had died for want of a termination. Can I ask you why that sentence, that very important sentence, was in your Observer article on the Saturday, but not in the original article that you wrote on the 14th of November for the Irish Times?
Well, I suppose throughout the original article, it was quoting the concerns of the husband, Praveen, and at no point, there was, it was hinted at in the headline, which obviously I didn't write, though in quotes, a refused determination was in quotes. I was reporting the concerns of the husband and what he said he was concerned about and what he said happened in the hospital, whereas my piece in The Observer was a more kind of background piece from my point of view, so it was obviously important for me to say quite explicitly that, it has not been established that the lack of access to a termination.
But can you see from the point of view of a lot of people that the contrast between what you wrote in The Observer and the headline on the original story, and I take your point that you did not write that headline, but it did travel around the world very quickly, that the assumption that this woman had died precisely because of a lack of termination?
Well, they were what I wrote were the concerns of the husband, and I suppose what readers decided to infer from that is what the concerns were of the husband and what he stated happened from his recollection of events in the hospital. Whereas, as I said, the piece in The Observer was a piece by me about the background, and I suppose the fact that a healthy, as far as we know, a healthy 31-year-old woman who was 17 weeks pregnant entered a hospital in 21st century Ireland and was dead a week later is a tragic story anyway, and would have been a big story anyway. A maternal death is very rare, but it's the husband's recollection or take on the events and his concerns that he wanted to talk about. That took it off around the world.
Okay, and can we just point on one fact of confusion between the Irish Times and RTE? Because on RTE's website there's a timeline attributed to the hospital itself, which states that, and it is the only date the timeline gives for which Savita was given antibiotics, and it states that she was given antibiotics on a Monday. However, in your original article, it clearly says that she was given antibiotics on a Tuesday. But then in the interview you did with Praveen Halappananvar, which was up on the Irish Times website, he says in the first 4 minutes of that interview that the antibiotics were administered on a Sunday. For those of us who are very confused by all of this, do you think you could help to reconcile those three different versions of events?
The HSE timeline is the HSE's timeline, which was Monday. He said to me that definitely it was on a Tuesday, and as I recall during that interview, in the original interview I did with him when he was in India, he said Tuesday. He said she was started on antibiotics when she collapsed. When he said she collapsed,
which is on a Tuesday originally.
Tuesday evening, and she was getting very ill.
Fine.
Now he said to me in the interview when I spoke to him back in Galway that there was then was this the recorded one?
This is the recorded one on the Irish Times website, where he clearly says it was a Tuesday. Sunday. He says that on this interview he says the antibiotics were administered on a Sunday.
And was that the audio or was it a video? Okay, so there were two. The audio. All one can surmise is that his recollection of events is the actual timeline and days that may be a little muddled. It's just. He said to me at one point that she was given paracetamol and not antibiotics at one point in the interview as well, and not given antibiotics at any point. So, but one assumes she was given antibiotics,
right,
if she was that ill.
And I suppose this leads to the final question, in that what do you attribute the disparity between Praveen Halappananvar's assertion that the family asked for a termination, and the fact that the hospital records contain notes of requests for tea and toast and many other things, but they contain no request for a termination?
And again, we only have Praveen and his solicitors' take on what was in or not in the notes. So we're relying all the time on their take on what happened. I don't know. That's a huge gap, and if that is the case, and it is the case that termination was requested, and Praveen says that there were witnesses to these requests. So that will all come out in the inquiry. If that's not in the notes, as they say it's not in the notes, well, that is obviously a huge gap. And I suppose one may even wonder, are requests for terminations recorded at all in Irish maternity hospitals?
But you're absolutely satisfied, despite saying that his recollection might have been muddled to a certain extent, you're satisfied that he did request a termination?
Oh, I'm not satisfied of anything. I'm satisfied of what he told me. But I await as much as anyone else the inquiry and what the findings. I can't tell for certain. Who knows what's come out of this inquiry?
Okay.
They may come back and say, she came in with the disease she caught from something outside the hospital before she even arrived in, and that there was no request for termination, and we await with bated breath.
Okay.
But that's the record. That's the events as recounted to me and recounted to many other people quite reasonably consistently by the husband.
And the final question, just your thoughts and reaction. The point has been made that there is a coronial system, a system of coroner's reports, which is tried and tested. What do you think about the fact that the facts are going to be gathered by a group that is politically appointed, and that it seems that the coroner's report will be sidestepped, and throwing into the confusion we have this additional report from HICWA? Which of these three bodies should we give precedence to? Which of them should we believe? What if they conflict?
Well, I suppose the coroner's the court will be the one that we can all feel is absolutely objective. The problem from Praveen's point of view with the coroner's inquest is that it will establish cause of death, but it may not establish why events led towards the cause of death. Also, there's no compellability of witnesses. I think there's a limit on how many medical witnesses can be called to a coroner's inquest. So there are limits. People say, it answers everything that Praveen and his and her family want, but it doesn't. I would feel that the HICWA investigation and the HSE ones will probably be reasonably reliable, but they don't satisfy the concerns of Praveen.
Okay. Kitty, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Okay.
Many
thank
thanks.
You.
And
Bye.
we're delighted to have Irish Times columnist Breda O'Brien and Labour MEP Phil Prendergast online. I hope those two ladies will be patient with me. Bill, you just want to come in briefly on the back of what Kitty said there.
Kitty's description of that is fairly fair, but not quite entirely accurate. The coroner's court's duty is to establish the cause of death and the circumstances of death, not to attribute blame, but to establish what the facts are that led to this woman's death, and then to make recommendations subsequent to that as to what change should be properly made in the public arena to prevent a recurrence.
Okay.
She also very interestingly said that she didn't make any prejudiced comments. She's not assuming it had anything to do with abortion whatsoever. This is an infection case. It is very important to know when the infection started, what the signs were, and all the rest of it, Mark. And I think that the other thing is that there is compellability of witnesses.
There is compellability
in the coroner's court.
That's interesting. All right, let me turn now to Phil Prendergast, Labour MEP. Phil, you're welcome, and thank you for joining us from Brussels at this late hour. Given what you've heard, and feel free to disagree with it if you wish to, but given what you've heard, it seems there's no basis whatsoever to be having a debate on abortion, at least not on the back of a tragic death like this.
Well, again, I would just extend my sympathies to the family and, of course, the people in Galway that were involved in this case, because you're absolutely right. To be mixing this up with abortion is incorrect. There is a series of protocols in place for somebody that would be admitted to a hospital in the first trimester, which is the first 12 weeks, the second trimester, which is 12 to 24 weeks, and the third trimester, which is 24 to term, and then normal labour is between 37 and 42 weeks. But anyway, in this case, this poor lady presented at 17 weeks with her waters gone. Now, in any hospital, the standard is that on admission, there's an assessment carried out, usually very initially by the midwife who would do observation.
And you have worked in hospitals as a professional in this area, haven't you?
Yeah, I worked as a midwife for over 21 years in South Tipperary General Hospital in frontline services in ward and postnatal ward, so I'm quite familiar with the protocols, and there would be fairly standard protocols across the country on admission procedures for the different cases. When someone would come in with a it's established, first of all, that it is liquor, which is the water that's around the baby, and that's done by a specific test which indicates that it's either liquor or it may be a kidney infection, and if so, that's established. And then there's a scan done, they're seen by the doctor, and there's a mode of action planned for the patient.
Let me turn to Breed O'Brien. Breed O'Brien, it seems that even Phil Prendergast, who's a Labour MEP, saying this had nothing to do with abortion, this tragic death, necessarily.
It's such, I can understand exactly, and I share in it myself, where people are so devastated by the death of this lovely 31-year-old woman and the tragic loss of her baby and a husband who's left bereft of everything. But it's a terrible pity, in a sense, that some of this kind of calm analysis didn't happen on the first day. Because, for example, Paul Cullen wrote an excellent piece, I don't have the date of it, a really excellent piece going through the possible causes of death. If that had appeared in a side panel on the Irish Times front page, it would have, in a sense, so much would have been saved. The idea that Ireland is not a safe place to have a baby. I think about the women booked into Galway University Hospital to have their baby and the fears that they're going to have now. And it's very clear what the cause of death has been established, but the sequence of events that led up to it have not been established at all. But there are a number of options, and none of them are necessarily going to find that it was anything at all to do with the timing of the removal of her contents of the womb. You've looked at the antibiotics, but it's not at all clear either. Like the HSE timeline says that she spontaneously miscarried. Praveen, in the interview with Miriam O'Callaghan on Primetime, said that they only had time to have the line in, which I presume means, they had put in the line into her arm when she delivered on the table, and the poor little baby, it was a baby girl, was delivered that way. Other accounts have said that there was a procedure to empty the womb. We don't even know that, and yet there's this huge push for legalised abortion in the country.
Can I just now turn back to Phil Prendergast? Phil, your party has a lot of people who have not been slow to, even though most people would accept that there is no necessary link between the two issues. A lot of people in your own party, the Labour Party, have been quick to build a case and to use this tragic death as momentum for legislation on abortion.
Well, not just people in the Labour Party have been doing this. In fact, there's quite a lot of people have got engaged in the process of getting an awful tragedy mixed up with a situation that hasn't been adequately dealt with. And I do think there needs to be legislation for the X case, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I do think that the very, the poor man, bereaved and absolutely horrified. There is nothing worse than seeing a healthy young dead in a bed, I can assure you of that.
But you say that legislation is needed. is it healthy or dignified to pass legislation in the wake of this tragic death, because it is effectively building your house on sand?
Well, the facts of this
or
case
maybe
are
building your house on sand.
The facts of this case are that in the clinical evaluation of this woman at 17 weeks, we don't know did she have a pre-existing blood disorder. We don't know if she had a pre-existing infection. We don't know if the pre-existing infection caused her waters to break, or did her waters break cause an infection to actually to increase. We don't know any of those facts, and the investigation that will be held will show that out.
Right, but can you say here and now that the government will not legislate before that report has come out? Because there seems to be a rush to do it regardless of what the facts are.
Well, regardless of what the facts are, nothing is going to change the outcome for that poor family.
No, but what I'm saying is,
there is a report.
Are we going to wait until the Savita inquiry is concluded before we take any legislative steps?
There shouldn't be any mix whatsoever about the Savita case.
But there shouldn't be any mix-up, that's clear. But given that there shouldn't be any mix-up, can you say to your voters that no legislation will be passed until we have the full final facts of the Savita death inquiry published?
I don't think. I think it shouldn't be the question that's being asked in this case.
Why not? Why not?
Because
it was if Savita's death stimulated this whole debate, is it not imperative?
It didn't really. There was an opportunity there where there was an expert group deliberating for a year on the X case. They were to come back to Parliament. There was a delay to that. It was supposed to happen in July.
But Phil, you're a Labour MEP admitting that there is no, and a midwife using your considerable expertise to say that there is no link here between the death of Savita and abortion. You're saying that. And yet, at the same time, you're saying we should proceed, or are you saying that we should proceed with legislation possibly before we know the full final facts of why she died? Isn't that a complete contradiction?
The two questions don't arise in the same conversation.
But they are all over the country. They're linked on Twitter and social media, on RTE and Newstalk.
I understand that, and I understand people's need to express themselves when something as awful as this happens. But the simple facts, and if we can be dispassionate about it for a moment, there's a case that is now going to be investigated, possibly by certainly by the HSE, certainly by people who have a great degree of expertise. There will be the protocols of the hospital looked at. There will be what the management in the case was. There will be blood work looked at. There will be seeing is there a pre-existing.
Yes, and in the meantime, we could take rights from unborn children, or perhaps pass legislation that puts mothers' life at risk before we know the full facts of what goes wrong. And if we do that, we won't have solved the problem, will we?
Well, Mark,
we could put women at risk.
There's an expert case now. There's an expert report that has yet to be deliberated.
Right.
We had the case tonight by Claire Daly being brought in the door. It was inappropriate because there hasn't been an opportunity where this 58-page report needs to be looked at and the different options discussed. I do think there needs to be time.
Sorry. Breda, can I put a question to you now, please? Surely Phil has an absolute point here. Even if we accept that Savita's tragic death had nothing to do with our abortion regime, nonetheless, we could all benefit from greater clarity, couldn't we? We can't rule out that it wasn't caused by doctors being afraid of taking certain courses of action because the law wasn't clear enough.
Well, certainly the medical council guidelines are absolutely crystal clear, and I think anybody fair has acknowledged that. But I was saddened by the line that the expert group took. They said that basically implied that the European Court of Human Rights had said that we must legislate. I went back and I looked at the judgment. What they said is that there had to be absolute clarity when a woman was entitled to treatment and where she could access that treatment. And I would love to see, as an interim measure only, to see guidelines put into place that make it crystal clear that if the cases, and we've just seen the dreadful confusion as to what exactly did happen and in what sequence and how, but let's just take it that it was a case where something should have been done that wasn't, we'll just take that as a hypothesis, that there should be guidelines which make it absolutely clear to people that there's no ethical problem with intervening in these cases where a mother's life is at risk. But if we go ahead and do something as dreadfully unjust as legislating on the basis of X, I think we will be back here in 20 years saying, oh my God, look what we did in 2012. We rushed into it on a wave of emotion. And okay, Phil's point is valid. There was an expert group report coming out, but it would have been discussed in an entirely different atmosphere if it hadn't been for this tragedy.
Let me put that final point to Phil. Phil, you can't seriously expect us to believe that at the back of their minds, Labour people who want legislation are not secretly accepting that they have a wind at their back because of this tragedy.
Look, I think, Mark, you can interpret anything. It's possible that, as Rita has said, there's a wave of emotion surrounding case now because there's a confusional aspect to it. And
is that a clever backdrop? Is that an advisable and responsible backdrop to have a debate against?
I look, part of the debate now is, as you said yourself, it's a debate on Twitter, it's a debate on Facebook, it's all the social media sites. It's a debate where people are exercised, they're coming to the door, they're protesting, they're having vigils. It's a very emotive subject, and there's never going to be any way where you can be dispassionate when you have a beautiful woman and you have beautiful photographs depicting this lovely woman in the prime of her life, at the top of her game, having her first baby, who is now dead with her baby is dead with her.
I know.
That she asked for an abortion, and that there's not a note. I've delivered, I don't know, probably thousands of babies. If I was to write down, Mark, everything into the notes that mothers would say at the point of delivery, it's not all pretty, it's not all exactly nice to the partners or whoever would be their birth partner, or even their midwife or doctor either.
I'm sure, and all of our sympathy and thoughts go out to the family. And thanks to Phil Prendergast for joining us from Brussels, and likewise to Breda O'Brien. We've got to leave it there. We'll be back after the news.